Oh, Greg's here. We can get started now. I will do all the proper introductions in just a couple of minutes. But first of all, welcome, good evening. Thank you so much for taking the time out of all of your busy schedules to be with us tonight. If you are just coming in, there are more seats over here. Don't be shy about walking in front of the stage. We don't mind. We'd rather you be comfortable. We're going to be together for a long enough period of time. You should be seated. So when you got seated, hopefully you noticed these postcards that are on your seat. Do keep these handy. We are going to be using them for a couple of exercises in the middle of our evening together. And if you have a writing implement, keep that handy as well, or use your noggin or your phone, whatever you prefer. But do keep these handy because we will be referring to them. Also, if you find yourself having questions during the panel, you can go ahead and tweet to her seat. And we will be reviewing those during the panel session. And if we can fit some of those questions in, we'll try and squirrel those up here and ask the panelists some of those questions. So feel free to tweet. There were some people that were asking why they were being asked to sign an NDA on entry. You can take as many pictures as you want. You can stream on social media. That was just for security purposes to get you in the building. You're not forbidden from doing things now that you're in the room. So take pictures like crazy. All right, so I'd like our speakers to go ahead and stand because we want to get a sense of who's in this room with us. So as we're talking about the ideas and intentions and actions that you guys can take, we have a better sense of who you are and how you might be applying them. So the way this is going to work, small handful of questions. If you agree with the statement, please stand. So first one's easy. I work at a company I consider to be a startup. Please stand. That's you. Okay, so that looks like it's at least half, just from my naked judgments. Okay, go ahead and take a seat. I am a first-level manager, whatever that first rung of management is at your company. Please stand. Okay, great. Next, I am a director-level manager, whatever that means at your particular company. I'm a director-level manager at my company. Okay. Next is I'm a VP or C-level executive at my company. Okay, I notice a handful of you standing up for multiple of these. All right, next is I was not born in this country. Stand up. Stand up so we can see you. Immigrants, we get the job done. All right, Hamilton fans here, I love it. Next question is, I am a caregiver to my family. Whatever that means to you. I'm a caregiver to my family. Okay, great, so that looks like maybe a quarter, maybe a third. Next question. I have felt negative impact from a common Silicon Valley bias. I have felt negative impact from a common Silicon Valley bias. Okay, so not surprising, it's most of this room. That's something that we'll be talking about today. And last but not least, I believe the Marvel Universe kicks butt over the DC Universe. Okay, and just out of wild curiosity, by show of hands, how many of you had no idea what I was talking about? So your assignment now is to go talk to your nerdiest friends. They would love to tell you their opinion on that question. So speakers, you can go ahead and take a seat. I think we have a lot of Marvel fans there. My name is Martina Lauchenko, and I'm your host for the evening. My day job is as an operating partner at Costanoa Ventures. And this is our third seat at the table event that we're putting on. The reason why we started putting these on is we believe in changing how business gets done, but it's not just through investing in new technologies. We also believe it's important in changing how those companies get built and how those technologies are getting built within those companies. So this won't be a newsflash for everyone in this room. It's not just a matter of having diverse and inclusive workplaces are a good thing to do or the right thing to do. Study after study has shown that more diverse teams, more diverse leadership absolutely contributes to higher performing companies. And so that's what this is all about. This is all about all of us raising the bar of performance inside of technology. And so that's why we're here. So we hope that you'll leave tonight inspired with some ideas and some action on things that you can do a little differently to help tip the scales for where we think we would like things to go. We, of course, are thrilled to be doing this with a partner this time that shares in those values, and that is LinkedIn. LinkedIn has provided this totally amazing space. LinkedIn, thank you so much. And I'd like to bring up Roxanne Ball, who is the leader in the Women in LinkedIn group that actually brought Seat at the Table to LinkedIn. So Roxanne.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Roxanne Ball. If you can guess from my accent, I wasn't born in this country. I was born in France. And I've embraced one of our values at LinkedIn, which is transformation. So I started in our Dublin office in Ireland, and I moved to San Francisco almost 3 years ago. So I'm super excited to host Seat at the Table at our San Francisco office. As you've seen, it's an amazing space. And first, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. So in my day job as an insights analyst, I help our customers make data-driven decisions. But that's not all. In my side job, I plan and I run events for a women's group called Women at LinkedIn. Women at LinkedIn is our largest employees resource group, and our mission is to create an inclusive community that empowers women to advance their careers while being their authentic self. So thank you again to everyone. So before I pass it off to Martina, I wanted to say a big thanks to everyone who contributed to make this event happen. So obviously the team at Costano AVC, Lauren Mulholland, my big boss, without whom this opportunity wouldn't have happened, but also the fantastic team that we have here at LinkedIn. So thank you to our catering team, to our events team, and to our media and production team, and finally to the volunteers from our Women at LinkedIn group. So thank you so much, and I'll pass it back to Martina.
So when I was in college, I took this amazing class about status and social pressure. And you know, young college students, I was like, I deal with social pressure every day. I have no idea what this status thing is, but I'm sure it's interesting. And the way this particular class was structured was the first half was a lecture where you learned about the facts, and the second half was a lab activity where half of the class would watch behind one-way glass as the other half of the class would participate in an activity. And I remember this class so vividly because the very first day we were taught about these things called status attributes, which I'd never heard of before. They are obvious things like your gender, the color of your skin, your height, your perceived attractiveness, but they were also things like whether or not you began a statement with a qualifier, like this might be a bad idea, but, or whether or not you spoke meekly in a new group of people. These things all added up to either give you more status or detract from your status. And so I felt like my mind was really opened learning about all these new things. And so I couldn't wait to see how this would play out in the activity. And that first day activity was your plane has crash landed on a deserted island, and there are 30 things on this plane, but you can only save 10. And your group must agree on the 10 things to save. You have 15 minutes to do it. Ready, go. And so the first group that was participating in this activity, immediately, this white guy who is a former Eagle Scout says, I was a former Eagle Scout, I know exactly which 10 things we should save, and these are them. And then the guys chime in immediately saying like, well, blah, 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 and they're all commenting on his list. And this woman says, hey guys, should we be talking about if there's a better process for deciding the right things to save? And this Asian woman is putting up her hand, she's waiting for people to call on her. Of course, nobody does. About halfway through the session, she finally inserts her thought. I don't remember what the thought was, except that by that point, it was way too late. No one was listening to her. And I remember this being so eye-opening for me, because these were people that had just learned about status attributes, what you can do to counterbalance them, what you can do to make things better so we don't fall into these same social traps. And yet the moment we had real-life stakes or urgency or a task, these well-intentioned, highly educated people all that information went out the window. And so for me, it was a moment where I realized this is what the workforce is going to be like. And no matter how well-intentioned we are or how well-educated we are, we as a society naturally fall into these traps. So the thing that it brought to me was I navigated my workplaces, how I spoke, when I spoke, with much more intention and thoughtfulness. And so that's what I hope to bring to all of us tonight, same kind of design. So the run of tonight's session is we're going to have Rachel Thomas from Lean In educate us on the facts, talking about women in the workplace studies and telling us exactly how things are looking in that workplace so that we're all armed with great information. Then we'll do a 2-minute exercise to reflect on and metabolize that. And then we'll move into our panel discussion. And I will apologize in advance. Emily Chang is valiantly trying to get here as quickly as she can. Her flight was delayed, so she will slipstream onto our panel as soon as she can get here, but the rest of us will continue to have a conversation about actions and what this is really like on the ground floor of actually living in these workplaces and having to deal with all of these biases. Then we'll have a 2-minute exercise to again metabolize that. Then we'll have some closing words and get you out of here as close to 7:30 as we can. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Rachel Thomas, who is the co-founder and president of Lean In, to help educate all of us.
Do me a favor and raise your hand if you think it'd be okay if or you'd be satisfied if one Caltrain in 10 showed up on time. Not a single hand is up for those of you who haven't looked at the room. And raise your hand again, would you be satisfied if 1 in 10 coffees you ordered were made correctly? No, not so much. Yet when 1 in 10 leaders in an organization is a woman, 50% of men say women are well represented. And ladies, don't laugh too hard, because 30% of women say the same thing. So if our bar for success is so low, it's hard to imagine a groundswell of change. This is one of the findings of Women in the Workplace. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, we conduct it every year with McKinsey & Company and are very grateful for their partnership. It is the largest study of its kind conducted every year. Last year, 220 companies employing over 12 million people participated. This year, we have 300 companies signed up so far. A couple years ago, we did a calculation with McKinsey that said it would take 100 years to reach gender parity in the C-suite. 100 years, and sadly, not much has changed. For the last 3 years, we see the same story in the data. Women are underrepresented at every level in corporate America, and it is far worse for women of color. And the one thing that we learned that we felt like was new and adding to the dialogue was women are much less likely to get the first promotion to manager, that first critical promotion, 20% less likely, and then they never catch up. So by the time you get to the C-suite, 1 in 5 C-suite leaders is a woman, and less than 1 in 30 is a woman of color. And I want to be clear, this is not because of attrition. Women are not leaving the workplace at higher rates than men. And it's not because of lack of interest. We know that women are just as interested in being promoted to the next level, and they are asking for promotions at the same rates as men. So that's bad news. There's a little bit of good news underneath the data that I want to share with you. So one is, back in 2012, McKinsey conducted a similar study by themselves, and they found that 56, so a little over 50% of CEOs were highly committed to gender diversity. Last year, we found that 86% of CEOs were highly committed. And I want to pause on that for a second, because that really matters. Because if the most senior leader in your organization cares deeply about gender diversity and hopefully all forms of diversity and inclusion, you are more likely to move the dial. We also found that women are negotiating for raises and promotions at the same rates as men. And this really matters. 10 years ago, it wasn't our research, but research told a very different story. Depending on the study you looked at, it said that men were negotiating 2 to 3 times more than women, or even as much as 8 to 9 times more than women. So my takeaway from this is that women are leaning in, we are doing our part, and now it's what can managers do and what can companies do to help close the gap. And that leads to the bad news. And unfortunately, there's a lot of it. I always say I'm glad there's drinks afterwards. And so the first thing that's really interesting, and I want to always start by saying, I don't share this to demonize men. I think that we naturally understand experiences that we're having, and people who aren't having the same experience, it's harder for them to empathize. It's harder for them to understand. But we know that there's a big difference in the way women see gender and opportunity than men. So 37% of women think that their gender has played a role on them missing out on an opportunity, a raise, a promotion, compared to only 8% of men. And when you think about the future, 39% of women say they think their gender is going to have a negative impact on future results for them, compared to 15% of men. And I want to pause there for a second. 2 notes. 1, 15% of men think their gender is going to be a problem for them. And white men are significantly more likely to think that than men of color. The other thing is we only need to look at the data year over year over year to know that women are more right. The other thing is men are more optimistic about their gender diversity efforts at their company. So they're more likely to think their company's doing a good job. And they're more likely to think that managers are taking steps to advance gender diversity, such as using diverse slates when they hire. And because of this, men are less committed to gender diversity themselves than women. And we're not going to get there unless we're all committed to moving the dial and getting to an equal world from a gender perspective and from all perspectives. So I look out and I want to say there's some male faces in the room, which I really appreciate. But next event, ladies, grab a man. We call it bring a man. Grab a man, tell him you'll buy him a drink, tell him you'll pay for his ticket. I know this was free, whatever you need to do. Bring them and get them into the room, because I need to start looking out at rooms when I have this conversation and see a lot more men. Because they're 50% of the population and we are not going to get there without them. The other thing we know is that many companies are overlooking women of color. Women of color face more obstacles to advancement and they get less support. They're less likely to get help from managers. They're less likely to get access to senior leaders, and they are promoted more slowly than white women. And the reason for this is that women of color face double discrimination. They face biases because they're women, and they face biases because they're people of color. And organizations really need to understand that that leads to a very distinct experience that they need to address head on. And I want to note, women of color are more ambitious than white women. They are more, it's the truth. We see it every year. Women of color are more interested in being a top executive than white women. And yet they get the least support in organizations. So I want to posit that if you want to get more leaders in your organization, lift up women of color. This is a place to make an investment. We also know that managers are falling short. So there's this theory in social science called the frozen middle. Senior executives are all on board, leadership, we want change. Rank and file employees think it's a pretty good idea. They're bought in, they'll do it. But if managers are not fully bought in, change gets stuck in the frozen middle. And think about it. Managers make most of the day-to-day decisions that impact our careers, whether we get a stretch assignment, whether we get promoted, whether we get noticed. Managers are also the people that ultimately decide if policies and programs are rolled out and how widely they're adopted. They're on the front lines. And I want to be really clear when I say managers here, I mean managers of all genders. So we know managers are less committed to gender diversity than companies are and CEOs are. And this really matters because we also know that employees are more likely to be committed themselves if their manager's committed. It's less important to them whether their CEO is, whether their company is, but if their day-to-day manager's committed, employees are bought in themselves. And perhaps because they're less committed, they're not doing enough. So about 30% of employees say that managers are making sure diversity of voices are heard, just 30%, about 30%. And even fewer say managers adjust gender bias behavior and language when they hear it or see it. And they need to do more to advance women. And again, this is women and men, all gender managers need to do more to advance women. We know that people are more likely to advance when they're advocated for, this makes sense, when they get stretch assignments, when they get advice on how to progress. And yet we know women, and particularly women of color, get less of this type of advice from managers. And my point here is not to demonize managers. I know there's a lot of managers in the room. My point is that companies need to do more to equip managers to be successful. So first of all, managers need to see the data. If you don't understand there's a problem in your company, you're less likely to be committed to be part of the solution. So MetLife did something a couple years ago that I think is really interesting. They're one of our marquee partners. They run what I would say, they're not here in the room, so I'll tell you, I think it's probably a pretty typical management training program, pretty typical. But they started to bring their managers in before the training started, and they actually showed them their women in the workplace data, so their company data, and said, look, we've got a really big problem. We're losing women. By the time you get to the director level, we don't have enough. By the time you get to the VP level, we don't have enough women. You need to support the women going through this program. And as a result, the managers made space and time for women to participate. They more actively mentored the women in the program. And as a result, the women who go through it are several times more likely to get promoted than people who don't. It's just sharing the data, making managers aware and making them part of the solution. We also know that gender-biased training really matters. And I want to be clear, the tricky part is good gender-biased training. And it's not all good. But it builds empathy, and it helps us remove bias from really common business decisions like hiring and performance reviews. And we know from our research that only 20% of employees who are involved in hiring and performance reviews have gotten gender-biased training. It's only 2 in 10, and that's just not enough. And then finally, this is commonsensical. We need to reward progress. So one of the things Intel did a couple years ago that I think is really interesting is it wasn't just at the manager level, but they basically said, we're going to set goals, and if we hit them, everybody in the company is going to get a bump in their bonus. They did that back in 2015, and every quarter since, they have met or exceeded their gender diversity goals because it made everybody incented to be part of the solution. We also know a lot of companies are not getting the basics right. I'm not saying they're not well-intentioned. I'm not saying they're not doing a lot. I'm just saying they're not getting what social scientists and practitioners would tell you are the basics for moving the dial. So recruiting. Only 30% of companies require mandated slates, and only 6% of companies are using blind resume reviews, and yet both of these things matter. So a handful of years ago, the NFL implemented what's called the Rooney Rule. And for those of you who don't know, what it said was for every head coach hire, we need to have at least one minority candidate on the slate. They now have 20% more minority head coaches in the NFL. And I will tell you, we did this about 3.5, 4 years ago at Lean In. I know we're a really small organization, but many of you are small organizations as well. And it literally changed the face of our organization. This is worth doing. Does it slow down hiring a little? Yes. But does it build stronger teams with a better diversity of voices and perspectives that makes you more effective? Absolutely. And blind resume reviews matter as well. There's a lot of research that shows how powerful a blind resume review can be. And let me share two things with you. One, if you change a woman's name on a resume to a man's name, the odds of getting hired go up by 60%. If you change a stereotypically black-sounding name with a stereotypically white-sounding name, it adds effectively 8 years of work experience. Just sit with that for a second. We also know less than a third of companies are setting targets for representation and setting targets for hiring and promotions, which are the levers that really move the dial. And everybody in this room, we all understand the importance of setting goals and tracking progress towards them. We would not get done the things we do at work if we weren't setting goals and tracking progress. We need to do it with diversity. Sharing metrics. So less than 25% of companies share metrics with their managers, or at least a majority of gender diversity metrics with their managers. Less than 1 in 10 share them with their employees. Yet we know from our Women in the Workplace data that companies that do share gender diversity metrics are higher performers, and this only makes sense. If people understand the problem, they are more likely to want to be part of the solution. And finally, less than half of companies are holding their senior leaders accountable for making progress, and even fewer are using financial incentives. And again, we all know what gets rewarded in companies is what gets done. We need to move from gender and all types of diversity. We need to move from it being a nice to have to a must have, to a business imperative. And I would close with, this is hard work. There's no silver bullet, but this is work worth doing. It is not just the right thing to do, and let's be clear, it is. It's the smart thing to do. We know when there's more women in organizations, sexual harassment is less prevalent. We know people on diverse teams are more committed and work harder. And we know that organizations with more female leaders have more employee-friendly policies and produce better business results. So when women rise, we all rise.
Thank you so much to Rachel. We had this fun conversation in the back room. I'm a lifelong copious note taker, so I took lots of notes, and this is where we're going to take a 2-minute session where you are going to turn to your neighbor and share what you found most surprising in those stats. So it's an opportunity for us to metabolize all of that amazing information that was just shared with us. So we'll take 2 minutes, turn to either your friend or a stranger, share what you found most surprising about that data. Okay. All right. So I know there's so much to process in that data, and I want to give Rachel just another round of applause for sharing all of that incredible information with us. There's nothing like being armed with the actual facts to help make change happen. So this is where we move into the lab section of our evening together, where we're actually going to be talking about what it's like in companies and in the real world. And the way this section is going to work is we're going to have lightning talks from each of our speakers. I'll introduce them. They'll tell you a little bit about themselves, and after that we'll move into more of a traditional panel discussion. So I first wanted to introduce Allison Lewis. who started off doing an internship in PR and events, but has spent over the last decade in market research, and she's going to tell you a story about that. She is now a group manager for consumer research at LinkedIn. Allison.
Hi, so I'm Allison. As she says, I am the head of their consumer market research team here at LinkedIn. So love this space. It's fantastic. We host a lot of great events. And my job, so I have the lucky job of leading a team of asking members, anyone, could be any of you who have a LinkedIn profile, for feedback. What do you like? What do you not like? And then my team and I have this fun task of coming back inside and telling our product team and our marketing team, hey, this is going well, or this is not going well, we might want to fix this. So I love this job. So how did I actually get here? I had the privilege of going to Johns Hopkins, where I studied all sorts of things. I was an international studies major. And I was lucky enough in that time to meet a really influential professor. I was actually just bonding in the back room of another Hopkins grad who had the same one. She's the marketing professor at Hopkins. Everyone has her. And she taught me, she connected the dots for me. She said, oh, you love math, you love marketing, and you love psychology, and you love talking to people. You should probably try out market research. And 10 years later, here I am, still loving it, still doing it. And so I started. I graduated, I started, and I was 5 years in market research world, and you do a variety of different projects when you're on the agency side, so I asked people about everything you can imagine, from very intimate bathroom habits that they had, oh yes, those were fun interviews, to asking people. I have a friend in the audience who still makes fun of me, who laughs at how I ask people why and how they chew gum, and we spent months studying that specific data point. And I was able to do research across the US. I lived in London for a year, being able to diversify and try to find out different markets. I did a project in South Africa for 2 months. So research was taking me all over, and I love this job. I get paid to ask people their personal opinions, and I continue to love it. LinkedIn recruited me about 5 years ago, and I've been here ever since. And I started as a researcher. I came from a very female-driven industry to an all-tech industry. And I was a total fish out of water for not just gender reasons, but because it was a lot of new tech skills to learn. I had a new industry, new stakeholders, new teams, a really ambitious team to keep up with. And as I got comfortable, I was a researcher for a while, I started to think about what was next. And I would talk to my boss about, what are the opportunities? And I'm a new manager, so that's my vantage point. And I'll be honest, I applied for a management job a couple times before it happened. And what really happened in my first management job, it was more of a conversation. I articulated to the head of the market research team, this is really what I want to do. I want to coach other people and inspire other people to be researchers. I have a passion for this. And he found a role. And he worked with a team within our market research team to find the right fit for me, and became less of a conversation. It became less of an application and much more of a conversation with him of like, where do we fit you? You've done the work. You obviously have gained my trust, and you're the right fit for this leadership position. Let's just make this happen. And my new role, the one I'm in now, being the head of the consumer team, which is still new, is where I had a female boss who pushed me very hard to even think about it. And I wasn't thinking I was ready, and it's thanks to her that I even got this role. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to share my stories about moving into management at a tech company.
Thanks, Allison. So very important, a big part of seat at the table is to make sure we have the different vantage points from newer to management to someone who is at the CEO level, which is what we have with Tracy. So she started out her career as a construction engineer and then realized, you know what, there's a problem with this industry. It's very paper-based, very inefficient, not a lot of communication, and it's like the technology world left them behind. So she chose to solve it by founding PlanGrid, which has now been used in over 500,000 projects around the world and is growing as a very successful company. So Tracy Young is the CEO of PlanGrid, and she's going to share part of her story with us.
Thanks for having me. So it's hard for me to see because somehow the men's faces are being mixed in. Can I just see a hand in the air from all the men in the room? Good for you guys. Round of applause. If you guys know that it sucks to work with a bunch of dudes in the office as well. It does. I worked in construction, so my background is in construction engineering. And something about sitting down makes me need to pee again, so I'm going to stand up. So let's see. I need to talk fast. So my background is in construction engineering. It was a miracle the founders of PlanGrid knew each other. We were two construction engineers, two incredibly talented software developers, and we were just in the right place at the right time. Steve Jobs announces the first generation iPad. The four of us look at each other and we thought, wow, this is the first time you can take computing power out onto a job site. Let's build software for it. And so we applied to Y Combinator's Winter 2012 batch, got accepted December of 2011, and we did the total Silicon Valley thing, which was move into a house together in Sunnyvale. And it was a lot like the Facebook movie, The Social Network, minus the babes and the pool parties. And all joking aside, and just this incredibly tragic thing happened to us early on in our journey of PlanGrid, which was our co-founder Antoine, who decided his title would be Chief Mad Scientist. He was diagnosed with cancer at 29. And we said, okay, we're gonna get you through chemo, we're gonna build PlanGrid together, and we're gonna do this. You're gonna get healthy again. And being like 20-something-year-olds who had never seen someone be like killed by cancer in front of us in our house together, we had no idea how fast it would happen. And so he passed a few months later, and one of the last conversations we had together, he said, Tracy, life is short. Take care of the ones you love. Never do anything that makes you unhappy. And I think about these words every single day. And I think even for the most lucky of us who get to live the entire spans of our human lives, our time here is very short. And so when we think about how we spend our time, it has to be about what is really worthy of every minute, every day, every week, every month, every year of our time. And for the founders of PlanGrid, it was a privilege for us to build this software. I mean, what our co-founder Antoine wouldn't have done to be here, actually he would really like to be here in this room right now because there's a bunch of women here, what he wouldn't give to be here with us right now. And it was a privilege for us to build software for this industry. And that's really changed the perspective of, I guess, how I live and occupy this world. What else do I want to say? So that was definitely a moment. There was this other moment that was kind of defining for me. Our board director, Carol Bartz, you're gonna love this. I wish she was here right now where she could tell it herself, but I'm gonna channel Carol Bartz. And she spoke at one of our, we throw a Women in Construction conference every year. And there's like this room full of like 500 women in construction. And Carol says, ladies, do you want to occupy the world like this? Or do you want to occupy the world like this? And then she says, yeah, that's what I thought. So get your bitch wings out.
I had never heard them called that before. I love it. So, oh, Nick, it's hard to follow that. But we want to call out Nick for being so brave at being our sole male panelist. And Nick is one of those Renaissance men that falls asleep reading about quantum mechanics, but then spends his days as CEO of Gainsight, which is the world's leading cloud-based private company for customer success software. So it has been named as one of the top 50 private companies to work for in that category by Glassdoor. And the most important thing, though, is how values-driven Nick has been in founding Gainsight and leading it. And they have these really cool values like beginner's mind and Gainsight childlike joy. So I'm going to let Nick tell all those stories to you as he tells you more about his story.
Awesome. Thank you, Martina. I'm going to stand as well. So I never write speeches before, but I actually wrote this because my mind was so full of like, what do I talk about? I mean, I'm honestly so honored to be here. So I have some thoughts I just wrote up here. First of all, I just want to say up front, I am like super privileged, like the most privileged person you could possibly imagine. I'm a guy, I was born in America, I live in Silicon Valley, we're pretty well off. I went to Ivy League stuff. I know that Marvel's way better than DC Comics, as you said. I'm so like privileged, I even have a freaking pocket square. It's like the definition of privilege, right? And so I'm like the person for whom the system is rigged. Seriously, like I think about that every single day. I mean, I appreciate it. It's cool to have a rigged system for you, but like I think about that every single day. And honestly, I was preparing for this and talking to a lot of friends and stuff, and I just thought about how like, yeah, I'm running this company, it's doing well. And you know, I like to think it's, oh, you know, I'm smart, I work hard, and it's all my merit, and right, like the snappy dressing. But I wonder like if I had all the things I have and I were a woman or I was someone from an underrepresented class, would I be here? Like, would I be doing this? Like, would I ever got these opportunities? I don't know. So I stand here knowing that like I'm a benefit of all this bad stuff that's happened, but hopefully in a small way can try to help make it better. So why do I care about this? I know that like every guy, when you get on stage, you're supposed to say, well, it's because of my insert female family member here, my daughter, my wife, whatever, and or you're supposed to say it's good for the bottom line, right? Those are the two appropriate things you're supposed to say. I have daughters, I have like great daughters, and I have like a business and I want to make money, and I think the research stuff is great. But to be honest, I find it kind of like sad that we have to try to justify either with our family connections or our business treating people like human beings. So that's why I'm here. I actually am just shocked that like if people look out, and there are a lot of people look out as the stats showed, and they don't see the issues. They think it's a level playing field. I feel like they're kind of willfully blind. I'm trying to open my eyes. I think I'm still too blind. I think there's so much more to go, which we'll talk about. Obviously, all this stuff has so many ramifications, not just for business, but for like people's safety and health. And so it matters a lot to me just in general. I'm obviously not a politician. I'm not a philosopher, although I love philosophy, love physics. I'm a CEO. I run a little company. I think I can have a small impact, right, around the people around us. And I kind of feel like if I can't have an impact like that, what's the point of whatever I'm doing? And that ties a little bit into like our values and purpose at Gainsight. So we put a lot of thought into how we run our company. And the way we define our purpose is not about the business or making money, but it's to be living proof that you can win in business while being what we call human first. So human first meaning we don't treat people as means, we treat them as ends. The people aren't the means to doing something, they're not the assets, they're the end, they're the goal. And the business is actually the mean. Now, if you think about that and being human first, if half of humanity is not being treated well, it seems like a really important problem for our mission. So that's why this matters to us at Gainsight and to me, personally a lot. As I think about being a human first CEO and trying to be a feminist CEO, there's three things that like are on my mind, which we can talk about tonight. First of all, like I meet a lot of other rooms, right? And the other rooms with the CEO meetings don't have a lot of women on. We're very sad, right? And so a lot of conversations are much more real the other way, right? And I don't know if you know, the number one thing people say, which I think Emily talked about in the book, is with a famous CEO that said this is, it's really hard. It's really hard. Yeah, like this diversity thing is really hard. So let's go back to talking about other stuff. They do, all the time. It's really hard. And I find that like super ironic because like all of your business stuff is supposed to be hard. You're a freaking CEO. You're making all this money. Like it's hard to like launch a product and raise money and sell stuff. It's hard to do everything. There's a famous book about being a CEO called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. It's literally in the job description to do hard things. So like the first thing I feel very passionate about is just because it's hard doesn't mean it's impossible. And our whole job is to figure out hard things. And I think it's like, it's daunting. I read Brotopia, honestly, like cried through parts of it, but like, it's if you saw like somebody driving around in like a red Tesla crying, that was me, by the way. But like the challenge, it's daunting, but I kind of like the analogy I tell myself is I'm like enterprise software or sell kind of stuff, right? And the way enterprise software works, if you don't work it, is you market to people, right? They fill out forms. That's called leads. They turn into pipeline, and then you close those leads, right? If a CEO went to their board and said, you know, I'm missing my numbers and sales numbers, and we just can't make our sales numbers. But you know the problem? It's a pipeline problem. You would totally get fired, right? And yet they go to the board and talk about diversity and say it's a pipeline problem. And it's like, oh yeah, it's just a pipeline problem. It's not a big deal. So number one is it's hard, but I think that should be inspiring because it's important. Number two is just for me, everything in business is small steps. Like you can't get to a giant company overnight. You start as a small company, you become, you know, and so in my company, we had so many small steps. Honestly, most of them, like not me, just other people. Like I got really lucky that one of our first executives that we hired super early is this woman named Allison Pickens, who's unfreaking believable. Some of you people in the room know her. And she brought in so many other amazing women in the company and changed so many things in the company. And it was like one small step hiring her, right? Second small step, I did a search for a chief people officer, which by the way, shouldn't be that hard to find a diverse slate. And this recruiter, I told him, I was like, you really want to have a diverse slate of candidates? And it was like, guy. And I was like, this is an HR search. This should not be impossible. And so at some point, the small step I took was, I'm not going to do any more interviews until we have a balanced slate. And then and the next week, 5 interviews with women. I hired a great woman. And the third small step is just like, inside and outside your company. Like we have a customer community and a conference. Actually, Tracy was really kind to speak at one of our events. And we just work on like diversity outside of our company and our community and who's on stage. And we're never perfect, but we're always trying to get better. So the third thing is that just I think about, and honestly, this part of being here is it's easy to say, oh, diversity, that's like the diverse people's problem, right? Like in the company, it's the women that should talk about women's issues and the underrepresented people of color that should talk about those issues, right? But there's like a study in HBR 2016 that says when people that are underrepresented try to advocate for their own rights, they're often penalizing companies. So I feel like there's an opportunity for me. I'm super safe. There's nothing bad's gonna happen to me, right? Seriously, like what's possible? Like, life is so ridiculously good. So like I could be here and help. Right, and it's some tiny way, right? So I just feel like everyone in Silicon Valley talks about changing the world, and I don't know if our software changes the world or whatever, but I feel like if we can have a small impact by changing the world around Gainsight, that would make me feel good. And so that's kind of why I'm here. And the last thing I want to say is, coming up here, the one thing I feel bad about is there's just so many other voices that should be up here, just like hundreds of people and writers. I'm so excited to be here with Emily. So many people at Women at Gainsight, but I've learned from all of them, and hopefully you can share some of that and frankly just try to listen as well. So thanks for having me here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nick. That's a theme we'll keep coming back to, is a series of small steps. Emily, you deserve a special round of applause just for being here and making it.
I'm so sorry I'm late. I have flight delays.
Yes,
Sorry.
everybody knows. We were like, hey, Emily's trying to make it here. So you guys obviously all know Emily Chang, who is the author of the national bestseller, Brotopia, which 100 of you lucky people actually got on your way in. She's also the executive producer and anchor for Bloomberg Technology here on the West Coast. So Emily, share your story with us.
Whew. I'm gonna sit, is that okay?
Of course.
All right. So I was born in Hawaii. Is anyone from Hawaii? Yay! Yay! Born and raised. And yeah, went to college, didn't have a journalism major, but I had decided like this is what I want to do. I started working in the local station in Honolulu, worked my way up, had various internships every summer. And in my senior year of college, I started writing at the station in Boston. And my first day was the day after 9/11. And so there was a lot of work to do. And I mean, I just sort of fell in love with telling stories and telling them on television. And I would, I'd work 8 hours shadowing people and shadowing reporters and producers, and I'd stay another 8 hours and make my own tape. And then I'd get people to watch it and ask them for their feedback. And they'd be like, I think you got a few more years. And worked my way up, and I lived in London and China working for CNN. I covered the Olympics. I covered North Korea. I'm totally amazed at what's happening right now. And then Bloomberg gave me this opportunity to launch a tech show in San Francisco, and I was like, what? Me? Like I honestly, I'm being completely honest, I didn't know what an IPO was. Like I had covered business, but I'd never covered business. And so, it was an incredibly steep learning curve.
But now, just like sort of what you were saying earlier, I love it. I feel like it's an everyday education, and I'm getting to interview these incredibly influential people who are changing the world every day in almost every way but one, which is the tech industry has this massive diversity problem. And I'll remember in the early years, we were just trying to get people to come on the show, and you'd pick up the phone and they'd be like, Bloomberg, what? Bloomberg has a television network? And so, that's really what it was about, was building the reputation. But over time, as we started getting more prominent guests on the show, and I started getting more comfortable with my role, I became more courageous about asking people, what are you doing to hire women? What are you doing to promote women? What are you doing to fund women? Which, by the way, these aren't hard questions, but they were so politically incorrect, even 3 years ago, and people would be squirming in their seats. And I at one point I asked that question of an investor who, they had no women in their US investing business at the time. And he said, we're looking very hard, but we're not prepared to lower our standards. And, that was just the spark that lit the fire. And I was like, this can't go on any longer. That said, I never thought I would write a book. I never thought I could write a book. And I was lucky to be surrounded by some people. I have a couple of colleagues. One of my colleagues wrote a book about Elon Musk, who I don't think we should tell him you were crying about Brotopia and your Tesla. He might take it back. And then maybe he won't be one of the luckiest guys on the face of the earth. My colleague Brad Stone wrote The Everything Store about Amazon. And so, I had people sort of around me that I could ask questions, like, what's this like? Can I do this? And it's interesting, my literary agent, when I first told her the idea, she was like, I don't know. And I was like, okay. Hung up the phone. I was like, I guess I'm not going to write a book. And a week later, she called me back and she said, I'm so sorry. I found an editor who wants to publish your book. And my editor had worked in publishing for a very long time, and she'd taken 2 years to try working at a startup. And it was so horrible, she left and decided she was going to go back to publishing and find a woman who was going to write a book about women in tech. Wow. True story. Wow. True story. And so they really took a chance on me, and it could have been anything. It was like, write a book about this. It could have been 12 stories of amazing women who've broken down walls and cracked the silicon ceiling. But as I was doing my research and having these conversations, I realized that there's just so much we don't understand about how and why we got here and what we're doing wrong, that we just can't sort of fast forward and tell these stories of success, because there's so many people who aren't bumping up against the silicon ceiling. They're just trying to make their way. And so I had an amazing writing coach. He's the head of the San Francisco Writers Grotto. And the first few months I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea. I'm literally just talking to everyone. I literally asked everyone I knew, what do you think the problem is? Every dinner table conversation, this is what we would be talking about. And he said, look, if you knew the answer right now, it's not worth writing a book about it. And so it really was a journey. And this was before Me Too, before Trump, before Susan Fowler. And so, over the course of the last 2 years, the story completely changed. And my wonderful editor, the book was supposed to be published in a year. She's like, we need to publish this right now. I was like, no, I can't do that. She's like, no, we need to publish this right now. So we fast forwarded the whole process. I crammed all this stuff in. We got it out. It was still probably a month too late. But luckily it was a good moment. And so I'm late because I was talking about the book in Las Vegas, and I was in New York before that, and I've been invited by all of these tech companies to come and talk to their workforces, which has been very unexpected. They could have said, your book is called Brotopia, no thank you very much. But I've been really encouraged that they at least want to bring me in and have these conversations. And my hope is that I can start the conversation and leave, and that they'll continue the conversation and hopefully get to a better place. Because you talked about making your little dent in the universe. I believe that the people who are changing the world and taking us to Mars and building self-driving cars and connecting the world, organizing the world's information, they can hire more women and pay them fairly and fund their ideas. This is not too hard a problem for us to solve. Well, thank you for working so hard to be here. You bring up something that's really important that I'd love for all of you to tackle, which is, has the current environment really changed the conversations that are actually happening at companies? And do you feel at your companies that people are more open to the conversations than they were even just a year ago? We'll start with you, Tracy.
It's a good question. I think about a year ago, we started something called Grid Groups, which are our employee resource groups. And representing the Grid is our diversity group, and Speaking Up is our women's group. And it's been really cool seeing the team talk openly about anything related to this topic. Yeah, so for us, it's just been really inspiring to hear these incredibly vulnerable stories about their lives and how that bleeds into professional and what they would like to see for the future.
So Allison, I'm curious, because I know LinkedIn has a lot that they try to do specifically around this. What is it like at your level, and are you feeling like it's making a difference for individual contributors and early managers?
Yeah, I mean, I think LinkedIn has these conversations a lot. Emily came in and spoke like a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago. I think I've been here for 5 years, and I actually started like the month after Lean In came out. And so I was all fired up, feminist, like, oh yes, like we're gonna talk about like gender issues in the workforce. And I'd say LinkedIn does a really good job from the executive level of making sure that it's passed down to all the management levels, of calling it out when you see it. And I think it's a public story, a famous story of our head of sales who looked across his table in his leads table and noticed that there were no women. And a woman actually also pointed this out to him, and he actively changed that. And so as a company, I believe that LinkedIn is very focused on making change. But I do notice like all of the conversations, like we have a strong women at LinkedIn group by far, and I've been a part of it and had these conversations, but you continue to have these conversations with other women, which is why I'm so excited. You know, I was saying, I think earlier, I'm excited to be on the management side, is where you actually feel like you can bring people along. And that's really where I feel like you see the most of change. Is like we can only talk about it so much. You need to start actually doing a little bit more.
Well, Nick, I'm curious. Tina Fey described the current environment as being landmine hopscotch, because it can be so electric and difficult and challenging for men to have conversations about this. So what is it? I mean, I know you're not speaking for all men, but what is it?
You are.
Yeah.
Not all men, hashtag.
Just some of them.
Yeah.
But what is it? What has this environment been like for you? And have you noticed that it has shifted in the last year?
Well, I mean, one thing I'd say is like, there's multiple ways to answer your question, right? Like, the minefield women navigate every day is so much bigger and more complicated than what men are dealing with now.
So
I know, you're so nice.
You are so good.
No.
I love it.
I just don't have a lot of energy, time to worry about the plight of men in today's society or whatever, right? But I think the cool thing, which is a little bit of what your first question was, is I do think there's more openness. It's easier to talk about it, like even as a leader of a company. You know, I have 500 people in the company, and if I talk about things that like nobody wants to talk about, sometimes it just it doesn't go anywhere, right? So I feel like it's easier to have the conversation. Just as an example, like, I mean, honestly, the Susan Fowler thing was such a spark, right? Like, but things take a while to travel, right? We have people all around the world in our company, and I remember talking to somebody in the Midwest, like in our company in like sort of March, April of last year. The Susan Fowler blog was January, I think. And I was like, well, this is really important. I mean, like, did you see what's happening at Uber? They're like, oh, what's happening at Uber? And I was like, whoa. But then like, I was like, wow. But I mean, I'm on Twitter and I'm following, so I'm like much more in the real time. But then over time, like everyone knows that this is a thing to talk about. And if it's easier to have that conversation. I'll just give one trivial example that I think was interesting, because I feel like sometimes it's cool to not just talk about the huge things, but also the little things. Because a lot of little things add up to the big things, right? And so Allison Pickens, who's our Chief Customer Officer, amazing, and she and I have a conversation, and we're always we always want to identify the little things. So we're getting mic'd up here and, for this event. And they have the traditional mic at this thing, which I think is harder for women with dresses.
Which I'll just show.
Yeah.
It's attached to my bra
It's kind of
strap,
awkward.
'cause I
Right?
don't have pants on.
Yes.
And so Allison brought up, we do a conference every year. She's like, hey, like it's really awkward for women to have that thing if you're wearing a dress. Can we have more of the mic over the ear at our conference? So if women are speaking there, you know? And it's like, I feel like a few years ago, if a woman had brought that up, people are like, what's wrong with you? That's so low on the totem pole. But all those things add up. And I feel like now it's okay to talk about those things, the little things and the big things. So I feel good about that.
So Emily, you're traveling all around the world, the country, talking to different companies. Obviously, your book has sparked a conversation where people want to talk to you about the content that's in it. And you've also noticed just for yourself, you've had more courage in talking and asking these questions. But have you noticed in the last year and a half that the environment has changed and the openness around the conversations has shifted?
I mean, I'm in these conversations, right? But this is a self-selecting audience. I don't think, James Damore isn't in this room. And so, I'll go to Amazon and the room is full and employees are fired up. They're like, what can I do? And that's great, but there's, thousands of employees who aren't in that room. I think everyone is more aware, but there's probably still a lot of people who think they're not part of the problem. And so a lot of this is about self-examination too, and we all have our own biases, and we all have things that we can do and we can do differently. You asked about men, and my initial reaction is, people know where the line is, Like, you generally know where the line is, but I do know that there are even good men who are, like, kind of confused. And so I agree that it's, the egregious behavior, so obvious, so like zero tolerance, right? Zero tolerance, but it is all these small things. I had 12 women engineers over at my home for dinner 3 weeks after Susan's post. And, none of them were surprised. And they were all just tired, They're like, we love our jobs, we love doing our part to change the world, but we're so tired of being the only woman in the room over and over and over again, and it's this constant sort of emotional labor that's almost like a second job, where you are having to prove yourself over and over again because somehow you're supposed to be super exceptional because you're there. And I think that these are the kinds of things that aren't going to change unless we get 50-50. I know that sounds like a fake construct, but we really need to aspire to have more balanced workforces. Like, if you have 6 men around a dinner table, the conversation is a certain way. You swap in one woman, it changes slightly. And if it's half and half, it's a completely different conversation. That's when we're going to have a real culture change, and when we can all reach our full potential. Like, there's research that shows that men and women are much more similar than they are different. And that the differences that we perceive are because of socialization and because of opportunity and how opportunity is doled out. And that means we're not reaching our full potential. And the workforce is 50-50. Women make up almost half the workforce. They're more than 50% of college graduates. I know the pipeline problem is the thing, and I have a whole thing about that in the book. Because I think the tech industry created the pipeline problem and today reinforces the pipeline problem and then absolves itself of responsibility. I could go on. But if you have an imbalance in your workforce, you're doing something wrong. You should be looking at your hiring processes and your promotion processes and how you're retaining people, because it's not just about hiring, it's about retention and progression. Women are twice as likely to leave tech as they are to leave women are twice as likely to leave tech as men. They're not going to jobs. They're not going to take care of their families. They're going to jobs in other fields. And so, we need to keep the women that we have engaged over the course of a long career.
So, go
Can I
ahead.
add one little anecdote? By the way, I thought it's interesting. It ties to your book, which is, it ties to this question. So I was at Fortune Brainstorm last summer, and you were speaking there, and Emily in this book, in Brotopia, talks about running this session on this issue, and there's Ninian Wang was there, and a lot of other people in all these stories, and I was like, the session was starting, and I was gonna go walk in, and I think you describe in the book how a bunch of men left the session,
Like
right?
dozens.
Like tons. I'm walking in, and
This is a diversity town hall.
this is July of last. Yeah, exactly. This is July of last summer, and it shows how much things have changed. I think. Still at that point, there are 4 guys.
Now they'd be photographed and like on page 6.
Totally. And so at that point, so we're like outside the thing, and I'm like, I'm gonna go see this session. I'm actually really interested in it. And there's 4 other guys there, and they're like, this diversity thing is so like done. Like we don't need to talk about it anymore. I think it's over. Like this is so overdone. And I was like, I guarantee they would not say that now. Even if they believed it, there's no way anyone would in a public setting say, and I'm glad that they wouldn't say that because it's freaking ridiculous, right?
Very important point. Tracy, I'm curious because you came from construction, which I would imagine is at least as bad, if not worse, than tech. When you think about those 2 industries, is one more challenging to navigate than the other? And are there lessons that we can learn from one versus the other?
Yeah, so I'm trained as a construction engineer, so in a lot of ways it felt right because I understood the problems. I had some idea of how to solve it. I think transitioning to tech was definitely new. I mean, growing a business, being a CEO, that was definitely challenging a different way. But in terms of a lens of just sort of being a female, Asian female in these 2 industries, I will say that I was just incredibly lucky to be able to be in construction in the Bay Area. It's much different than, let's say, if I went to our average client in Alabama, for example. And so I will share that I wanted so desperately to fit into construction as like whatever I was, 21, 22-year-old out of university. And a lot of the decisions, a lot of the technical problems that we were experiencing on site would be solved during like smoke breaks. And so as a 20-whatever-year-old, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna smoke with my foremans because like they are making decisions and I wanna be there because I wanna be a part of it. And then I would like adopt their language so that we'd have this shared vocabulary, which meant I cursed a lot. and I even went as far as like, what is it? Sorry, it's like the circle on the butt. Dip, thank you, yes. And it was like the most disgusting thing, and I would have never done that, but that was how committed I was to being a good construction engineer. And so at some point, I realized that I just wasn't being myself, and that I was trying to reflect back what I was seeing from my colleagues who were wonderful people. I just wasn't them. And so something about maturing and being more confident in my own skin, I will say that I am so much happier now just being myself because, again, life is too short to be anything else. And I got the benefit of that going into tech, right? It's nice because building a company also feels rewarding in the same way as building construction. I mean, I just chose the right partners. I chose the partners that were just like, you're gonna be CEO. And I was like, absolutely not. You guys are older, you're more educated than me, you're smarter than me, and they're just like, you've been leading the company for the last 3 years. You're gonna be CEO. And I was like, oh, right, that's true. I boss you guys around. And then I also chose good business partners and venture capitalists to work with. So, yeah.
So one of the points of conversation that always comes up around these issues are how important advocacy is, and to have advocates, and for all of us to act as advocates, which is probably why most of you are here. And so Allison, you hinted at this a little bit at the beginning in your lightning talk about how you had both a male and female advocate that helped pull you into your current management positions. How has that shaped how you act as a manager now? And are there any other advocates that continue to help shape and inform your career?
Yeah, well, I'll touch on that specifically because she's here in the room supporting, of course. And I'd say it's funny. So I was working for my boss at the time, and I had just started. I was a new manager on her team, and I was so excited. And she knew where I wanted to go, which was I really would love to lead the consumer research team. That was the dream someday. And someday happened a lot sooner because the job opened up. And so on our one-on-ones, like every week, she'd be like, so have you applied yet? How about now? And like every week I'd be like, no, I'm learning so much. Like this is so new, I love the team, which is true, I did. I'm learning so much, I love everything. Like I can't possibly think, I'm not ready, I'm not qualified, like I can't do it. And she finally really got through to me one time by saying, okay, they're going to hire someone who's less qualified than you, and then that person's going to be in the role for a couple of years, and how are you going to feel about that? And I was like, oh, right. Thank you. And so she pushed, but I'd say she not only pushed me to apply and talk to the boss about it, but she then advocated. And so I know that I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be in the role if she hadn't gone and talked directly to the hiring manager and said, here's like 5 reasons why Allison's ready for this job. Because whether he had hesitations or not, it became, again, much more of this conversation between me and him about what it would take to be in this role, and I wasn't really applying for it, which was very jarring. I obviously went through an interview process, but it was more of a conversation of like what I can add value and how I can do it. And so I feel like she's taught me so much, and I can only do so much for the people that I now get to manage, and I start to think about, okay, how do I work with people to figure out where they want to go? Obviously, I'm biased. I want people to be interested in research, but they may want to move within LinkedIn. And it's a tricky situation to figure out how to get someone to articulate where they want to go and then help them connect the dots. I'm starting to do that even within this new role for someone on my team. She's articulated where she wants to go, and now I'm putting pressure on the hiring managers to get her there and make it happen. And it's a really inspiring and empowering position to be in, but that's how I've seen from my perspective the only way that it happens.
And so I'm curious for Nick and Tracy, you guys are kind of at the top of your organizations, but were there people that were advocates on your behalf that helped you get to where you are now?
I'll let you answer that first. Think about it.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I feel like I said, systems a little rigged, so I kind of feel like things kind of flowed, you know. I mean, you know, I think you talk a lot about this, about how you have a network early on, right? Go to a good, you know, the prestigious school, and you know some people, and when you follow back in your life and you say, how did I get here, and how many things happened because of those early things? So I think some of it was really nice people that helped along the way, and some of it was I was just in fortunate situations, for sure. So a mix of a little bit of both, I'd say.
How about for you, Tracy?
PlanGrid just kept growing. I mean, it started off as this fun project, and then we decided to see it through because in honor of our best friend, and then we just never stopped working on it. So of course, I've gotten so much help along the way.
Does it change what you do for policy-wise and what you establish in PlanGrid?
Yeah. So we signed the Equal Pay Pledge, I think like 2 or 3 years ago. And when I brought it up to our executive team, at that time, it was like 4 other males and me, said, I would like us to do this. And there's no hesitation. They're like, absolutely. We had HR go through basically every comp in the company and made sure we made adjustments. And actually it was like kind of all over the place. So anyways, we solved that, and we were committed to making sure that that wouldn't be a problem moving forward. We also made sure that we had really generous parental leave policy for both men and women, that you know, people are taking 3 months off to be with their families, and then they're coming back even more committed to PlanGrid, both men and women. So I'm really proud of our team for making those decisions, because it does have a cost there, right? But it's about our commitment to the team members who are working their asses off to build PlanGrid.
So Nick, this is a question that came in from the audience, but how are you engaging males both within Gainsight and also outside of Gainsight about all of these hard facts that we were looking at before we started the panel session?
Yeah, I'll share like two stories. One is there's a guy in our company, and this story, by the way, reveals my bias too in a different way. We have offices, you know, throughout the country. We have an office in the Midwest in St. Louis, amazing people there. And there was somebody emailed me and said, hey, you know, this is maybe a year ago, like right before stuff became much more mainstream. And actually the same person who said, oh, what's the Uber thing? He said, and he's a very well-intentioned person, but he's like, hey, you know, Nick, you're talking about diversity and gender diversity, but I really think it's just about everyone is diverse. And it's not about what you look like on the outside, it's just everyone's diverse, right? And I told him, like, I understand the point you're trying to make, but I also think that there's systemic problems for people of certain kind of groups. And we engaged in a very long dialogue over many meetings and emails, and he was very junior, and he was like a manager, reports to, and I was like, this is kind of awkward, but he kept kind of going back and forth, like like the long email thread, and you're like, make it stop, but it just kept going, and it kept going. Okay, but here's the interesting end of the story. Like, it sort of like fizzled out, and then I saw him we did like a company, like everyone get together, and he's like, Nick, I'm so glad you like engaged with me on that. It really changed my mind on like being open to these discussions. And this guy's in St. Louis. I was judging him as like, oh, red state, whatever, like California liberal, judging that, right? No, seriously, like I had my own bias. That's number one. Number two, I think like with other CEOs, the sad thing is there's still, I think it's changed a little bit, but there's still that like, yeah, it's hard or whatever, and like, or somebody makes that joke that's just not that funny anymore. And like, I don't engage, I don't laugh, I don't engage, I say what's funny about that. Like, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but just like, I don't find it funny, so I think that dialogue is helpful because it gets people to say, well, maybe that wasn't that funny. Maybe that isn't just a made up issue, things like that. So those are two things.
So you're talking about the little things that you're doing that shift behavior or awareness with those that you're interacting with. And Emily, one of the things I was struck with Brotopia was your very first piece of advice on what to do is be nice to each other. And I'm just curious, why was that number one? Was that something that was so glaring in tech that needed to be said?
I mean, the last chapter in the book has this bullet list of the bare minimum. And it is kind of sad that like the bare minimum has not been happening. It's treating one another with respect and dignity. That is we should be doing that every single day. And unfortunately, it hasn't been happening. We do all have our own perspectives and backgrounds and experiences that make us who we are, and we want to hear all of that. And people need to be free to share their opinions and share their input and speak up in meetings. And that only happens if they feel comfortable and if they feel like they can be themselves. And so, there's so much about, and I think there's so much, we should be asking questions of each other and more, how are you doing? And listening, really, really listening and getting to know each other. I think that's good too. Because otherwise, you're not going to be bringing your whole self to work, and you're not going to be reaching your full potential, and your company is going to be losing out on that.
So believe it or not, we're getting close to time. So I'm just going to go straight down the line with.
There's more suggestions to be nice to each other, by the way, yes, in case you're wondering.
7 bullets. They're all great. But parting advice for everyone in this room is clearly very engaged and wants to help increase the velocity of change. So parting advice from everyone on the panel about what are 1 or 2 small things that people in this room can do to increase the velocity of that change. Allison.
So I would say, depending on your perspective and where you are, if you're looking for ways to move up, my advice and the way that it's worked for me, at least, is to articulate where you want to go and have a passion and a reason for it. Articulate that and then find someone who's going to advocate for you. Then if you're in a position of power, quote unquote, that could be management or not, or at the higher up, be watching out for that and hold your peers accountable. I really like the conversations that we have where someone will point out like, okay, well, are we talking about this from a diversity perspective, and hold your peers accountable in any hiring decision that you're making. Especially, it's something that I think about as a new manager for sure.
Thank you. Tracy.
I can't even watch the news during the week anymore. It's too friggin' depressing for me, just because there's so many problems in our world today. And then when I look at government and politics and leadership and just organizations and industries of influence, and it looks predominantly like one type of person, and there's nothing against white males, I'm having a child with one, but if it's one type of person, then we're literally missing out on like the hardest working, smartest minds in the world. And so I would not have been a construction engineer had I not seen a female construction project manager, a female construction executive. I would not have gone into tech and be a founder if I had not seen other female founders and thought to myself, it's like, well, if they could do it, I think I could do it too. And so literally everyone in this room has a responsibility to be good examples for the next generation. And to encourage people to pursue their passions despite social norms. And if we can all do that, it just keeps magnifying.
Two things. I think one is the little things and being comfortable to point those out, like the microphone example. And there's just so many little things that show the bigger bias in the system. And I think people should be more comfortable to point those out, because I think it opens the dialogue on the bigger things. It's a little bit, there's this theory, some of you know the broken glass theory of like, if you fix the broken windows, then crime goes down. There's some questions about that theory, but the concept is that you fix the small things, the big things get fixed. I think that's actually a really relevant one here. Second one is just like hire more women, but not like in some abstract like get to 50% right away thing, but like literally every one person, not just women, people that look different than your average company, like every one person makes a huge difference. So don't get daunted by the stats, like I guess get to work on hiring people.
Yeah. I would say don't accept the status quo. And I do think there's this healthy balance of playing the rules of the game, but changing the rules of the game as you go. You can't just run in and be like, this hiring process sucks, and stomp all over it. People aren't going to be very receptive to that. But I do think that there are clever ways to give constructive feedback and raise your voice and say, hey, Nick, I think this isn't working, in a way that will be well received. And like Tracy said, we all have an opportunity here to make a difference. And we can't just throw up our hands and say, well, that's just the way it is, or that's just the way my company does things, or that's just the way it works. I had an opportunity to interview Jane Goodall last week, who's amazing. So I'm going to use one of her quotes. Like, you all have a chance to make a difference. You have to decide what's the difference in the world that you want to make. So I'll leave you with, I can't add anything to that. It's Jane Goodall.
That is such great and important advice. And with that, we're going to move to our second and final activity. There are two on here, these two columns. One is one that most people have trouble articulating what makes themselves remarkable. And part of having a more confident self out there in this world is just owning whatever it is that you do there. And part of that is not just knowing it on the inside, but it's being able to articulate it externally. So this is to think about what that is and to actually say it to that same neighbor or friend that came with you so that you're externalizing it and putting it out loud. And then the second column, again, we're going to try and compress all this into 2 or 3 minutes, is what as a result of tonight are you going to do differently? Because it's like everyone on this panel has said, it is the collection of small steps that everyone in this room takes that actually will create that change. So tracking those little small steps, just 1 or 2 things you're going to do differently will make a big difference. So we're going to take 2 minutes to do that activity, and then we're going to come together with some closing notes and thank you. So 2 minutes. Turn to that neighbor and metabolize what we just talked about.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah,
thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, I know 2 minutes goes by really fast, but we want to try and keep you guys relatively on time. So I will say that just because we are going to close out our programming does not mean that your conversations need to stop. It is a good thing that all of us want to talk so much about this. That is actually why we have these seat at the table venues, to make sure these really important conversations with these totally amazing people happen. So with that, I want to once again thank our panelists for their incredible insights. And I also want to thank someone without which seat at the table wouldn't happen or be possible. Rachel Kwan, where are you? So not only was it Rachel Kwan, but the whole Kwan family is here. Her mom, her friends were volunteers. So seat at the table happens because of the incredible hard work of Rachel Kwan. Also, Team Costa Noa, if you guys could just stand up real fast so we could acknowledge you, know who you are. Thanks for being so supportive. And I'm going to leave you with a closing thought before I turn things over to Christina Hall, which, super fun fact, we are in the same freshman dorm. So we know each other. Yeah, we have stories about each other. Yeah, we do. So a couple weeks ago, I saw the movie I Feel Pretty, the Amy Schumer movie. Anyone here hear of it or see it? Yeah. So it's a totally silly movie. But for those of you that don't know the premise, basically she goes to a SoulCycle. So Amy Schumer is a very, very full-figured. She goes to a SoulCycle class. She falls. She hits her head. She gets a concussion. And she wakes up seeing herself as this incredible, svelte, beautiful person she's always wanted to be. And so she walks around the world in her full-figured form, but having all the confidence in the world and just acting like she's got it going on. And initially, the whole world is looking at her saying, who are you to be acting like this with all this confidence? But because she's so authentically in herself, she starts to change how everyone sees her. And the point of that movie is still true for us. That change that we want to see in Silicon Valley is right here. It's actually inside of all of our heads, and we can make it so by our intentions, our actions, and probably just as important, our reactions to others. So keep that in mind. Don't forget these very important small steps that you're going to take. And with that, I'm going to introduce Christina Hall, who is the VP of Talent here at LinkedIn, to share a few parting words as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Martina. It's great to see you again. My name is Christina Hall. As Martina said, I run the HR organization here at LinkedIn. It is so wonderful to see you all here tonight. And first off, I'd like to thank the amazing panel and Martina in facilitating it. It was just a great discussion. I loved having it. I also want to specifically call out LinkedIn's DIBS team, which is our diversity, inclusion, and belonging team. If everyone who's been a part of that could give a stand up for us. A quick thanks. Thank you. This team is incredibly committed to making some of the changes that we've been talking about tonight. LinkedIn is 42% women. We're 38% women at the executive level, and those numbers look great compared to tech peers, but it is not enough. As we are talking about tonight, we really want to be, as Aaron Burr said in Hamilton, in the room when it happens. We need to be at the big table, whether that big table is the boardroom or the CEO's staff or the head of sales staff. Women have got to be representative there, and the DIBS team is very committed towards that goal, and I know all of you are really thinking about that tonight. I also want to just leave you with the thought that, it's wonderful to have that positive sense of being nice to one another, but I think I want to add a little hook there for you. If you think of what Madeleine Albright said, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. And so as we leave tonight, I would ask that you look around and you think about how you can help your fellow women, whether you are a man or a woman, but it's time to look and help one another. So thank you. I think hand it off to Greg.
Yeah, so last but not least,
is a person that has been my multi-time advocate at multiple companies. I am at Costa Nova Ventures because of this amazing advocate, Greg Sands, who is the founder and a managing partner of Costa Nova Ventures. Greg.
Thanks, everybody, and thank you for being here and engaging in the dialogue with us. I think it's also important to say, and it came up a couple of times, that the issues around women of color and people of color in general are every bit as important and every bit as impactful as the discussion about women in general, and we embrace that whole conversation. It is, I want to also thank LinkedIn for hosting us. I want to thank our panelists, as has been done. They did an amazing job. And I want to thank Martina, because Martina is someone who helped me understand that I have standing to be part of the conversation and to find my voice on it. And I'd just like to say that this work is amongst, we get to be at the founding stage with these amazing companies, but this work is as important as anything we do. And it's as meaningful and impactful for all of us as we go about our jobs to try to help companies create environments where everyone has opportunity, where everybody can do their best work. I would actually like to suggest a modification from Christina's comment, my neighbor Christina, which is, don't just be at the table, make a difference. You belong, and you have the opportunity to be there and have a big impact and make a difference, and it's important for you to be heard. And that involves people like Nick and myself sometimes being quiet, which we're learning. But I think for all of us, creating places where people can bring their whole selves to work today, everybody has opportunity, people get to express their full potential, is the greatest thing that we can all do. And we're really appreciative for you and engaging the conversation with us. And I hope that all of us will commit to doing one new and different thing tomorrow to begin and continue the journey. Thanks so much.
All right, that is it for this evening's lineup. But as everyone has said, don't leave, don't walk out that door without thinking about what you're going to do differently tomorrow. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and we hope to see you next time.